red wine on my shirt, blood on my forehead, and a message sent from my phone, phase 1 complete. That's how I closed Christmas dinner last year. Sounds insane, I know. But it all started with a simple suggestion and one word that sent my daughter-in-law over the edge. My name is Edward Parker, 66, widower, retired auditor. I live alone in the $2 million house Laura and I built over a lifetime. My son Michael, 36, has everything: a career, a family, a home of his own. He never needed anything from me. At least that's what I used to believe. Until Christmas Eve 2023, when they walked into my house with expensive wine and a plan they thought was flawless. Before I tell you what really happened after that glass of wine, let me just say this. Sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. That winter the cold bit deeper than usual. Snow glazed the roofs of the quiet suburban streets south of Seattle, where I'd lived since before Laura got sick. The 2-story house still looked the same: white porch rail, pine wreath on the door, warm light spilling through the windows. Inside, the Christmas tree stood tall in the corner, gold lights flickering across our wedding photo. I had spent the whole week cleaning and cooking. Slow-roasted turkey lemon pie from Laura's old recipe, and a bottle of Napa Valley Red I'd saved for years. Back then, I still thought this Christmas would feel peaceful like it always used to. At 3 in the afternoon, a silver Tesla crunched over the snow in my driveway. Doors shut quick and deliberate. Michael came in first, black coat, cologne sharp and unfamiliar. He smiled the way successful men do, polite but distant. "House looks great, Dad." "Thanks," I said, my voice steady. "Where are the kids?" Then Vanessa appeared carrying a bottle in a leather case. "I found Mom Laura's favorite wine," she said brightly. "Had to order it weeks ahead." She set it on the dining table, still wearing her white wool gloves. Her eyes drifted around the room, stopping at the framed picture of Laura. Her smile stiffened. I noticed. Ella and Liam came running in, their laughter spilling through the house like music. Their hands were cold from the snow. I knelt, hugged them close. Ella looked up wide-eyed. "Grandpa, did you get us presents?" "Of course," I said, pointing to the red-wrapped boxes stacked in the corner. Vanessa was quicker. She pulled out bigger, shinier boxes from her tote, placing them right in the center of the room. "Here you go, these are from Mom and Dad. Open them up." The kids squealed, paper tearing. For a moment it felt almost like the old days. Then Ella looked up, holding the small box I'd given her, a watercolor set and a sketchbook. "Mom said your gifts are just cheap stuff." The words dropped into the room like glass shattering. Michael's brow tightened. Vanessa forced a laugh. "Kids say the funniest things." "Don't mind her, Dad." I smiled faintly. Said nothing. But something inside me turned cold, like the snow outside thickening against the window. We sat down to eat. The turkey smelled right, the candles flickered. Vanessa poured wine for Michael, smiled across the table like the perfect wife in a family commercial. The children giggled in the living room. For a brief second, I thought maybe I was imagining things. But after dinner, when the kids went off to watch cartoons, Vanessa poured herself another glass. Her voice softened, too casual. "Dad, we wanted to talk to you about something." I set my fork down. "Go ahead." Michael cleared his throat. "You've been living alone in this big house for years now. We just think maybe it's time you let Vanessa's parents move in. They could keep you company, help with the house." The air froze. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath. "Her parents?" I asked quietly. Vanessa jumped in. "They just sold their place in Spokane. They're looking for somewhere nearby. Mom used to be a nurse, Dad's a handyman. They could help around here. It makes perfect sense. I shook my head slowly. I don't need help. I'm fine on my own. Michael leaned forward, tension in his voice. Dad, it's not just about you. This house takes work. You're not young anymore. I met his eyes. I've lived here 30 years, son. I know exactly what I can handle. Vanessa's voice changed. It lost its sweetness. Mom's been gone 6 years, Edward. At what point do you stop holding on to everything like a shrine? The word shrine hit like a slap. I looked her in the eye. This home is ours, mine and Laura's, and it's fine the way it is. Her smile vanished completely. She turned to Michael. Told you. He never listens. Michael sighed, rubbing his forehead, saying nothing. I stood, carried the serving platter to the kitchen. I appreciate the thought, I said evenly, but I'm not interested in having anyone move in. Behind me, chairs scraped against the floor. A pause, then the sound of wine being poured again. Vanessa's voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. Selfish. Just like your mother said. The man only ever thinks of himself. I froze for half a breath. The kitchen light fell across our wedding photo, Laura's smile steady, kind. I took a slow breath and turned back to the dining room. Let's stop this conversation here, I said. No, Vanessa snapped, her voice breaking. Do you have any idea what we're dealing with? The mortgage, tuition, medical bills, everything's going up. We just needed a real solution, and you... She stopped mid-sentence, shaking. I didn't respond. Michael reached to calm her, but she pulled away. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft crackle of candle flames. From the living room, the cartoon's laughter bled faintly through the walls. I poured myself another glass, drank it in one motion. My hands were steady, but somewhere inside I knew something had shifted. The peace I'd guarded for years had already begun to fracture. Vanessa sat stiffly, eyes blazing. Michael avoided my gaze, knuckles white around his glass. Outside, snow kept falling, thicker, heavier, soundless. In the candlelight, the room still looked warm, ordinary, almost serene. But I could feel it, the crack under the surface. And once it split open, nothing in that house would ever fit back together again. I set the last plate on the table. The sound of silverware touching porcelain was soft and precise, like the faint ring of a church bell. Steam rose from the turkey, carrying the scent of butter and herbs. I asked Ella to bring more napkins to the living room. Liam followed her, his small feet leaving wet prints on the rug near the door. Michael sat upright, fingers interlaced as if preparing for a meeting. Vanessa turned her wine glass slowly in her hand, the deep red catching the flicker of candlelight. Michael cleared his throat, said it was time the family talked about something serious. I nodded, told him to go ahead. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the silver garlands drooping from the Christmas tree. He said I was living alone in a $2 million house, that it was wasteful and dangerous at my age. Vanessa took over seamlessly. Her tone was smooth, rehearsed. Her parents had just sold their home in Spokane, she said. They were looking for a place nearby, healthy, and willing to help around the house, handy, reliable, family-oriented. If they moved in, it would ease everyone's load, save costs, bring the family closer. I listened, hands resting on the white linen cloth. I told them I didn't need anyone living with me. I was fine. I liked my routines, my solitude. Everything in this house had a rhythm I understood. I mowed my lawn, changed my own bulbs, fixed my own faucets. If I needed help, I hired it. My doctor was happy with every test result. There was nothing wrong. Vanessa set her glass down. Her voice softened, but the edge underneath was steel. She said that attitude was selfish. She reminded me Laura had been gone 6 years, that I couldn't cling to the past, hoarding memories like property, that it was time to think about the living. Michael didn't disagree. He looked at me with that quiet plea men wear when they're too tired to argue, waiting for my yes to release him from something he couldn't say. I breathed in slowly, keeping my tone steady. I told them Laura loved spending Christmas here, that she used to hang the lights on the porch herself, bake lemon pies, and set 2 red stockings by the fireplace long before the kids were even born. This dinner, this room, was how I kept that promise to her alive. I said I appreciated their concern, but I wanted the house to stay as it was. Vanessa leaned back, her smile turning thin, precise like a paper cut. She said this house wasn't Laura's anymore. It was an asset. A $2 million property sitting half empty while the family struggled to make ends meet. Nostalgia doesn't pay bills, she said. Reality does. Michael rubbed his palms together, eyes lowered. He said work had been rough, interest rates were climbing, the kids' tuition higher than expected. Vanessa's idea made sense. He said he worried, what if something happened to me here alone? I told him I had an emergency alert system, good neighbors who checked in. Helen next door still brought pies over. Jim down the street cleared branches for me after storms. I said I understood financial anxiety. I'd spent a lifetime worrying about money. But turning this home into a halfway stop for convenience wasn't the answer. I told them clearly I don't agree. Vanessa frowned. She said I was denying reality, putting my own emotions above the family's safety and future. A good father, she added, knows when to step back for his children. Her parents were ready to pay symbolic rent, take care of chores. I'd lose nothing, only gain. I lifted my water glass, took a small sip to wet my throat. I said I'd heard every word and understood. Then I repeated firmly, my decision stood. No one would be moving in. Not now. The room went silent. The clock ticked faintly from the kitchen. Michael's hands tightened together. Vanessa stopped smiling. Her eyes locked onto mine, stripped of all civility. She said, if I insisted on this, not to blame anyone when things got harder. She warned there'd come a day I'd need help, and when that day came, not to expect a family waiting. I leaned back, breathing evenly. I said family isn't a cost-sharing plan. Kindness doesn't come from occupying someone else's space, it comes from respecting it. I said if I ever need help, I'll ask, but tonight I'm fine. Vanessa exhaled sharply, as if she'd just been slapped. She turned to Michael. I told you, she said under her breath, this house talks back. Her gaze drifted over the Christmas tree, the wedding photo of me and Laura, the modest red-wrapped boxes stacked in the corner. Then almost to herself, she asked, is anyone still alive in this place besides the memories? I almost answered, but stopped. My fingers had tightened around the napkin. I eased them open, stood up, said I'd check on the oven. I opened the kitchen door and stood still for a moment, watching the small orange glow inside like a field of light in the middle of winter. Chairs scraped behind me. I knew the conversation wasn't over. When I came back, Vanessa was refilling her glass. Her wrist trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. She said I was turning grief into a law, that people were meant to live in the present. She mentioned again how her mother had cared for entire neighborhoods, how a house with an older man needed a woman's hand. She talked about safety expenses, proximity to grandchildren. It was all logic, cold, perfect logic. I looked at Michael. He wasn't talking about safety anymore. His voice was low now, weary. He said this month's mortgage payment would be tight. I kept my tone calm. I told him if he needed financial advice, we could sit down after dinner and go over things. But no one was moving in. Vanessa whispered a word so quietly, it might have been to herself. Selfish. She placed her glass down the sound, sharp and clean. She said I'd rather keep an empty chair than let my family fill it. That I feared the living more than I mourned the dead. That an old man sitting in a $2 million house and calling it humility was almost comical. I didn't argue. I said Laura never asked me to fill the house with people. She only asked me never to fill it with lies. If anyone entered this home, they'd better walk in with respect. Otherwise, the door stays shut. Michael leaned forward, then stopped. His lips parted, then closed again. He reached for his wife's hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either. She reached instead for the bottle, poured another round for herself, for him, then for me. The red spiraled down into the glass, catching the candle's flicker like a drop of night. From the living room came the sound of cartoon laughter, Ella's bright voice, Liam calling after her. It floated into the dining room light and brief, but couldn't cut through the chill between the three adults. I touched the edge of the table, felt the waxed grain beneath my palm. The house hadn't changed. It was still warm, still intact. Only the people had shifted. Vanessa tilted her head back, drained her glass, set it down hard. She said, if I wouldn't think of them, then at least think of the children. That letting things stay like this only prolonged the pain. That stubbornness disguised as sentiment was still just stubbornness. She said faith in the past couldn't solve the fears of the present. I set my glass down gently, told her faith may not fix everything, but boundaries keep things from breaking completely. I excused myself to bring out dessert. I wanted to give the conversation an exit, even a small one. No one moved. When I returned with the lemon pie, Vanessa was still seated, hand already on the neck of the bottle. Michael stared down at the table as if reading invisible lines written there. The silence was heavy enough to make the candle hiss. Vanessa poured again. The stream of wine spread dark and deliberate, sweet and sharp in the air, an omen that this night would not end with words alone. Vanessa lifted her head. There was a brightness in her eyes, the kind that comes when someone's had too much to drink and is searching for a way out. She said everything could be simple if I'd just agree. Her voice carried through the room, drawn out and warped by alcohol. I stayed quiet, sitting straight, staring at the wine in my glass. The air smelled of cinnamon, orange peel, and candle smoke, thick with the weight of things that hadn't yet been said. Michael mumbled that it was enough, that we should talk about something else. It was Christmas. Vanessa turned to him, her laugh sharp, bitter. She asked if he still wanted to be a man, or if he was fine letting his father pull the strings forever. Michael said nothing. He bit his lip, eyes fixed on the half-eaten lemon pie. I saw it in him, the fear, the helplessness. I stood, straightened my shirt, and looked directly at her. I told her I didn't want anyone moving into this house, not now, not ever. I said I respected her as my son's wife, but that didn't give her the right to treat my home as a spare property for her parents. If she truly cared, she should help her husband keep his job and raise her children instead of trying to plant someone else in my house. Vanessa laughed, a dry, brittle sound, like glass cracking. She said I was selfish, that Laura was gone and I clung to the past like an old coat that no longer fit. That I'd rather keep a house empty than give anyone a chance to live in it. She stood, wine glass still in hand, eyes locked on mine. Michael whispered something. She shoved his hand away. I saw the glass tilt. The red shimmered in the candlelight. Then she shouted, "You're selfish!" The wine glass flew, too fast to react. Red liquid burst across the tablecloth, splattered onto the wood floor, stung my face. The smell, sharp, acidic, cut through the room. A shard of glass caught my eyebrow. Warmth spread down my temple. When I touched it, my fingers came away red. Michael shouted the sound of a chair crashing behind him. Vanessa froze. Her hand trembled, her lips parted. She looked as if she couldn't believe what she'd just done. Ella appeared at the doorway, eyes wide. Liam stood behind her, clutching the remote. Ella looked from the wine stains on my shirt to her mother. Her voice shook. "Mom, what did you do?" No one answered. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft hiss of candles and the wind outside the eaves. Michael rushed forward, grabbing Vanessa's shoulders. She jerked free, stumbling back toward the wall. He turned to me, stammering, "Dad, I'm sorry." "She didn't mean to." I looked him in the eye, pressed a napkin to my brow. "She meant to Michael." I spoke slowly, clearly. "I'm going to the hospital. You all need to leave my house." My voice was so calm it startled even me. I turned toward the hallway. Behind me, Vanessa began to sob. Michael murmured, pleading for her to lower her voice. Ella's cry broke into a wail. Liam followed. I looked back once. "Get the kids in the car, Michael." Then I walked down the hall and opened the bathroom door. The white light hit my face in the mirror. A thin line of blood traced down my cheek, mixing with the wine still clinging to my skin. I turned on the tap, rinsed the wound. The warm water burned. The smell of iron and wine rose together, acrid and alive. I pressed a towel against the cut, scanning the counter. On the sink lay Laura's photo frame, fallen. The glass cracked open, one shard on the tile. I bent, picked it up. Its edge sliced my fingertip, but I didn't let go. In the mirror, my reflection stared back, two streaks of red across my face, wine and blood identical in color. I remembered past Christmases, Laura standing right there, smoothing a new tablecloth, asking if the red was too bright. I'd laughed, said it suited her. Now that same red was on my shirt, on the table, on my skin. I folded the towel, pressed it tighter to my forehead, and stepped out. Michael stood in the kitchen doorway, coat in hand, face pale. Vanessa sat slumped in a chair, hair tangled, eyes swollen, mumbling between sobs. "Take your wife and kids home," I said. "Call me when she's sober." He started to speak, but I raised my hand. "Don't." He nodded, pulled Vanessa up, guided her toward the door. Ella turned once, eyes red, her small face full of something I couldn't name. I nodded back, tried to smile. The door closed behind them. Silence fell like a thick blanket. Outside, the wind whipped through the pines. Christmas lights flickered faintly against the snow. I walked through the dining room, picking up shards of glass one by one. The tablecloth was soaked dark red, the plates scattered. The smell of wine mixed with melted wax made my stomach turn. The room looked like a Christmas painting someone had ruined with a single violent brushstroke. I opened a window. Cold air rushed in, killing the last of the candle smoke. Outside, the snow deepened. The porch light cast a dim yellow ring over the steps. I stood there a moment, feeling my heartbeat settle. Then I went to the small study, opened the drawer, and took out my phone. The screen glowed against my bruised reflection. I typed 4 words. Phase 1 complete. Hit send. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed. 3 words came back. Keep silent now. I sat down, the shard of glass still in my hand. Candlelight wavered across its edge, reflecting like an eye, Laura's eye, watching. I wrapped the shard in a tissue, tucked it into the drawer. The cut on my brow wept a little more, tracing down to my wrist. I pressed the towel over it. The sting was gone. Only cold remained. In the living room, the tree still glowed. Underneath, the red-wrapped boxes waited untouched. One of them bore my name, Ella's handwriting, crooked and sweet. I stared at it for a long time. Outside, Michael's car engine started. The red taillights blurred through the falling snow until they vanished down the hill. I inhaled deeply, catching the faint mix of pine and candle smoke. Christmas night was slipping away, taking with it the last piece of what I used to call family. I turned off every light except one small candle on the dining table. Its yellow glow brushed against the wall where the wine had stained. I looked at it once more, then headed upstairs. In the hallway mirror, a man stared back, gray hair, hollow eyes, shirt still stained with blood. No laughter, no scent of pie, no Christmas. When I closed the bedroom door, the wind outside howled through the cracks, snuffing out the last candle flame. The house sank into silence, and I knew this night had drawn the line between everything that once was and everything that would never be again. I grabbed my coat keys wallet and shoved a pack of tissues into my pocket before stepping out onto the porch. The air sliced cold against my face, carrying the sharp scent of pine and wood smoke across the frozen boards. I got into the car, turned the wheel slowly over the thin layer of snow, and headed toward the nearest emergency room. Through quiet streets, past dark lawns and roofs lined with antennas, the faint outlines of a sleeping city. The wine on my collar had dried to a sour trace. The tissue pressed to my brow felt heavier with every minute. The waiting room was nearly empty. A small Christmas tree flickered beside the front desk, paper-wrapped boxes pretending to be gifts. The nurse looked at the cut and motioned me to sit. I filled out the form address birth year medications, checked the box for no allergies. My hand trembled slightly from the cold. A night shift doctor came in, snapped on gloves, examined the gash above my eyebrow. "Not deep," he said. "We'll use skin glue and a dressing." He cleaned at the sting of antiseptic cutting through the smell of wine. The cold burn steadied me. The hiss of the heater filled the room, footsteps squeaked down the hall, and from somewhere at the far end came a burst of laughter, an odd sound for Christmas night. I texted Richard Holmes 3 words. "At hospital now," then set the phone down. 15 minutes later, he appeared, coat dusted with snow boots streaked with mud, his breath clouding in the fluorescent light. 58 sharp eyes, the kind of man who never lets his focus slip. He sat beside me, glanced at the bandage, asked if I was dizzy or nauseous. I shook my head. He opened a small leather notebook pen, moving steady. "You've got cameras in the house?" I nodded. 4 corners, living room, dining area, kitchen, foyer. Audio's decent. He looked from my bandage to the wine-stained shirt, gave a small nod. "Good." I told the story in sequence. The dinner. The request about her parents moving in. My refusal. The word selfish. The glass, the blood, the kids at the door. My tone was flat, the way I'd once read financial reports after checking every comma. Richard didn't interrupt. He marked a few points, occasionally asked for a time or position, who stood where. When I finished, he closed the notebook. "The video will hold," he said. "It's your private property. Cameras in shared spaces, legal under state law. Audio's fine, too. There's no reasonable expectation of privacy in a common room." I memorized every word. It felt like anchoring myself to proof that none of this had been imagined. 2 officers entered, a woman sergeant in her 40s, a younger man behind her. They introduced themselves, asked if I felt well enough to give a statement. I said yes. The sergeant raised a camera, asked to photograph the wound and my shirt. I removed my coat, stood still, as the flash popped, once small and clinical. She asked where it happened, my relation to the assailant who witnessed it. I answered, clearly added that there was video and that the children had seen the aftermath. "Do you feel safe returning home tonight?" she asked. "I do," I said. "I'll lock up sleep in a room with a key and let my neighbor know." She nodded, wrote it down. They handed me a confirmation slip, read back the report. Summary asked to collect my shirt and the towel I'd used. I agreed. The sergeant sealed both into a clear evidence bag, wrote a code, and had me sign. As she opened the bag, the wine's sour scent rose again, like a memory refusing to fade. She said they'd contact the accused, issue a notice, and review charges of assault with a household object, additional penalties likely given my age. I listened but said nothing. That part was no longer mine to carry. Richard handed me a bottle of water. "Drink," he said softly, then asked when I'd installed the cameras. 3 months ago, I told him. After the bank called, someone tried to verify my account. He nodded, unsurprised. He opened his laptop, typed a message to his assistant downtown, requesting a data extraction order, timestamps intact. 3 clearest, still frames printed. "When you get home," he said, "talk to no one. No calls. No messages. Everything goes through me." I nodded. The warmth in his voice steadied something inside me. The doctor returned to check the bandage, told me to keep it dry for 48 hours and to come back if I felt dizzy or had blurred vision. I thanked him, took the discharge papers, slipped them into my coat. As I stood, my phone buzzed. A new number. "Dad, I'm sorry. Please let me explain." I looked at Richard. He shook his head. "Leave it." I deleted the message. Silence felt heavier than guilt. We stepped outside under the hospital awning. The parking lot shimmered under pale neon. Richard asked if I was okay to drive. I said yes. He told me he'd follow Park out front, then return at dawn with the data copy and a draft restraining order. "We'll file the complaint in the morning," he said. "Video, transcript, photos, all of it. You'll sign at 8. "I'm ready," I said. He nodded and motioned me toward my car. The drive home was hollow and soundless. I could hear the hum of the heater more than the tires. Streetlights passed in slow flashes of white. When I turned onto my street, the porch light flicked on automatically, painting the snow in gold. Richard parked behind me, stepped out, stood by the fence scanning the dark windows. "Tomorrow," he said, "install a smart lock. I'll need remote access for the video pull if you're not home. Tonight, close the curtains, shut off the dining room heater, and sleep upstairs." I nodded. On the door, the pine wreath swayed gently, its red ribbon fluttering in the wind. Inside, the smell of wine lingered. I cracked a window to let the air cut through, then shut it again. Richard followed me to the study. I powered up the computer, opened the camera feed. 4 black and white frames appeared. We dragged the timeline to the dinner hour, stopped where Vanessa stood up. The footage was sharp, almost cruel in its clarity. The glass flying, my shirt soaking. Vanessa frozen mid-motion. The children at the doorway. My hand pressed to my forehead. Every detail there undeniable. The audio captured her single accusation, crisp and damning. Richard said nothing. He simply wrote 3 words in his notebook. Clear, consistent, unprovoked. He closed the laptop, looked me in the eye. "From now on, no responses. Tomorrow morning we file. The day after we request a no-contact order. I want you to book a psychological evaluation, document the impact. Not because you're weak, but because the court believes what's written." I nodded. "Thank you." He added quietly, "Wash your hands well. Don't discard anything. If they request follow-up evidence, we'll have it." I pointed to the sealed bag the police had taken. "They have the shirt and towel." "Good," he said. Richard stepped out onto the porch, brushed snow from the railing. 8 a.m., he reminded me. "Try to sleep. If you can't turn on the radio, something old, something slow." He gave a faint nod, climbed into his car, and drove off, leaving 2 red streaks of taillight fading into the snow. The house was still. Only the soft sigh of the heater broke the silence. I stood at the dining room threshold, looking at the dark stain on the tablecloth. A deep, drying red like handwriting on silence itself. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, then turned away. Christmas night wasn't over, but something in me had already changed flavor like wine gone bitter in the cold. The next morning, the sky hung low and colorless. A thin trail of snow lined the window ledge like pale chalk marks. I brewed a pot of strong coffee. The smell of roasted beans filled the kitchen, bitter and grounding. The notebook lay beside the phone. At 8, I drove downtown to Richard's office. The elevator climbed slowly, the building nearly empty with the holidays not quite over. We signed the complaint, reviewed the extracted footage, matched timestamps, pinned everything into a thick file. By noon, a call came from the county sheriff. The case had been forwarded to the district attorney. They confirmed the charge assault with an object. The wine glass, they said, qualified as a weapon. 2 days later, a clerk from the courthouse phoned with a preliminary hearing date. I wrote it into my calendar, my pen steady. Then the phone buzzed again, Michael. I let it ring. Once, twice, then it went to voicemail. His voice filled the room, trembling at the edges. Dad, I'm sorry. Please let me explain. Don't press charges. We lost control. It was a mistake. I didn't call back. That night, another message arrived, shorter, urgent. Please just talk to me. I turned the phone face down, listening to the wind move through the cracks in the door. I thought if words can build a house, then silence can be a pillar strong enough to hold one. Early the next week, a friend from church texted me. She'd stumbled across Vanessa's post online, a selfie, her eyes red, hand resting on a window frame. The caption was plain, written in simple English. Some people can't forgive even blood. I read the line on the glowing screen. No names, no direct accusation. Yet the arrow was unmistakable. I didn't react, didn't press any emoji. I just turned the phone off. Outside Oregon, rain fell in thin, steady sheets. The yard turned dark and slick, the grass drowned under a gray veil. At the start of the month, the court issued a formal summons for Vanessa's hearing. Richard said I didn't need to attend, just wait for the update afterward. That night, I heard a motorbike stop outside, footsteps on the porch, then stillness. The doorbell never rang. Through the peephole, nothing. When I opened the door a crack, a paper bag sat neatly on the mat marked, "Welcome." Inside was a tin of leftover Christmas cookies and a small card printed with a pine tree. At the bottom, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "Please forgive me." No signature. I closed the door, set the bag on the kitchen counter, and sat down. The living room clock ticked in measured beats as though marking distance rather than time. Neighbors and church friends kept their distance. At gatherings, a small circle of quiet would form automatically wherever I stood. I didn't blame them. News moves faster than truth and slower than silence. Between the two people, decorate the gap with stories they prefer. On the sidewalk, the air carried the smell of wet pine and old paper, the kind of scent that lives between nostalgia and rot. One empty night, I opened the cabinet beneath the window and pulled out Laura's wooden keepsake box. Inside were photos, recipe notes in her tilted handwriting, a red ribbon, a faded concert ticket. I placed the 2018 Christmas photo on the table, switched on the desk lamp. Laura stood by the tree, head tilted, smiling at a glass ornament she was hanging. Michael was in a gray sweater, young, bright-eyed, his smile untouched by time. I was slicing a lemon pie, the wedge falling perfectly onto the plate, the glaze catching the warm light. There was carol music playing low, the scent of grated orange peel in the air, and laughter from the neighbors' kids outside. I remembered Laura handing me a handkerchief, saying, "Put it on the corner of the table so you don't rush." I'd replied by tapping the button on her coat, a small, wordless habit, like signing something precious. Everything in that frame was still warm as a newly lit fireplace. I set the photo beside a half-filled glass of wine. The light shimmered across the rim, showing ripples on the surface. In that reflection, I saw a man with gray hair, a thin white bandage across his brow, eyes dim as winter afternoons. I wondered when the first crack had appeared. Was it that night when I said I didn't need anyone? Or long before, when the space between my house and Michael's grew quietly like uncut grass? The next morning, Richard called, voice as calm as ever. Vanessa had appeared in court. The prosecutor read the charge. Her lawyer proposed a settlement. The court allowed time to review. "Stay disciplined," Richard reminded me. "No texts, no calls, no responses. Not online. Not anywhere." "I understand," I said. After hanging up, I sat in the kitchen. Rain tapped against the plastic roof, steady, patient, like fingers counting seconds. By the end of the month, the rain grew heavier. Wind struck the eaves. The Christmas lights I'd taken down the week before sat coiled in a storage bin. I set a clean tablecloth, placed one white plate, knife and fork, just a quiet act of order. I warmed leftover soup, added a pinch of black pepper, poured a small measure of wine. No TV, no radio, only the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock. When I finished eating, I lifted the glass just enough for the lamp to cast a thin line of light through the hall. I set the 2018 photo beside it, leaned back and watched. Somewhere far beyond town, an ambulance wailed once and faded. Rain drummed against the window pane like a soft knock. I raised my glass, looked into the dark swirl inside, and thought of something thin as thread, yet strong as a mooring line, the thing that had kept me standing through this winter. Everything else was just the smell of rain, and Laura's quiet reflection in the frame, still as a goodbye that never needed to be spoken. I woke earlier than usual the next morning. Rain still whispered on the tin roof, carrying the damp chill of January through the house. I brewed a pot of dark coffee, turned on the small radio just for the sound of another voice, and sat down at the desk. A few minutes later, the phone vibrated. Richard's tone was calm but precise. "The bank just called," he said. "They received a request for third-party authorization to access your account. It was sent from an email that looks like yours, but isn't." The form included a scanned signature of Laura and a filled-out transfer document. A cold current ran down my back. He continued, "Their fraud unit flagged it. The request came in on Christmas Eve, and the system auto-generated a warning the next morning, since the servers were offline during the holiday. They'll send us the full technical log today." I set the cup down, trying to keep my hand from trembling. Richard said he'd arrange a 3-way call with the bank's fraud division. "You just confirm what's yours. Let me handle the rest." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. 30 minutes later, he patched me in. A woman's voice came through, measured, professional. "This is Claire from Fraud Prevention Portland Branch." She explained that the authorization request came with a PDF attachment. Laura's signature had been crudely cut and pasted, paper grain visible beneath the ink. My own signature was a low-resolution photo, blurred and compressed. The request sought viewing and transfer privileges with a same-day limit. "The system flagged it automatically," Claire said. "The timing was suspicious, and the domain didn't match your verified contact list. The IP trace points to a residential provider in Salem." Richard's voice stayed even. "Please send us the log details, the header, the IP source, the timestamp trail. If necessary, we'll request a court subpoena for installation address verification." "I'll have that transmitted right after this call," Claire said. I spoke only once. I never sent any requests during the holidays, and I've never used my late wife's signature for banking paperwork. There was a small silence on the other end before she spoke again, softer this time. I'm sorry you had to hear this. Your account is under elevated monitoring now. We'll keep you updated. When the call ended, the kitchen felt too still. Only the rain remained tapping like a slow metronome on the gutters. Richard exhaled, quiet but knowing. It's more common than you'd think, he said. Children or relatives testing access, telling themselves it's convenience or safety or preparation. The ache that followed wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Suspicion, once proven, falls heavy. It doesn't float anymore. Richard read off a list of next steps. 1. Authorize the bank to freeze all permission changes and add two-factor verification. 2. Update your trusted contacts and remove every unverified address. 3. Sign a formal complaint for elder financial exploitation with the state hotline. 4. Document everything: calls, texts, emails, logs. I wrote each line slowly, the letters firm and straight, like balancing a ledger at the end of a quarter. He said he'd draft the elder financial exploitation complaint and have it ready by afternoon, along with a note to the prosecutor already handling the assault case. They need to understand this isn't just a family argument. It's financial misconduct. At that moment, Claire's follow-up email arrived. Richard forwarded it to me. The log was a map of digital breadcrumbs, black text on white background, time-stamped just before midnight on Christmas Eve. The system note confirmed delayed processing until morning and flagged it as a suspected forgery. Scrolling down, I saw the originating IP string. Richard cross-referenced it on a public registry, fingers tapping a muted rhythm on the keyboard. Then his voice dropped. Residential provider, Salem area. He paused. That's where Michael lives. By noon, the rain had softened. Wind brushed thin clouds across the tops of the pine trees. I made a sandwich, ate it without taste. The photo of Laura sat near the lamp. I traced a finger along the cracked glass edge and remembered a morning long ago, us waiting outside a bank before it opened, signing our first mortgage papers. Her hands were cold. I slipped them into my coat pocket, both of us laughing like we'd stolen a secret from winter. Some signatures don't need witnesses. They're written in the way two people hold hands. That afternoon, I drove downtown. The streets shimmered under a sheet of rain like glass pressed over the city. In Richard's conference room, documents lay spread across the table, the printed video frames, the assault complaint, the hospital report, and now the bank logs. He handed me the draft of the new complaint. Clear, precise, factual. I asked if we should include the exact time the email was sent, or just the alert timestamp. Both, he said. Let them see the timing, it shows intent. I signed. My pen didn't waver. Richard called the state's elder protection hotline, introduced himself, outlined the case, sent a scanned copy immediately. The person on the line confirmed receipt and issued a case number. Richard requested coordination with the district attorney's office, noting the overlap with the assault case. When he hung up, the room felt heavier, but also defined. He looked at me. We've shifted positions, he said. You're no longer just a father who was hurt by his daughter-in-law. You're a citizen who was attacked and targeted for financial control. The law can't heal what family breaks, but it can take care of the rest. We reviewed the camera footage one final time, selecting the still frames that spoke the loudest, Vanessa standing the wine glass, mid-air glass, scattering my hand, pressing to the wound. No shouting, no threat from me, just impact and silence. Richard noted it down. Straight line, he said. No detours. In the elevator's mirrored wall, I caught my reflection, gray hair, a white bandage, a folder under my arm. I didn't see a victim, I saw a man learning again how to stand upright. Down in the lobby, cold air rushed through the revolving door. Richard stopped before stepping out. "Call your neighbors tonight," he said. "If anyone's near the house, they'll alert the police. And remember, no messages, no calls. I'll handle everything from them. I understand." That night at home, the rain had stopped. The street glistened with uneven pools reflecting the amber streetlights. I opened Claire's email again, studying the clean geometry of timestamps and server lines. Christmas Eve. A forged request. Laura's old signature pulled from some forgotten document and pasted into a new intent. I shut the laptop and walked to the dining room. The new tablecloth I'd laid yesterday was spotless, white as blank paper. I rested my hand on it. Cool. Innocent. The phone buzzed Richard's text. The prosecutor received the bank logs. They're opening a separate financial investigation branch. I leaned back against the wall, eyes drawn to Laura's photo. In her face was a faint streak of light, not reflection, not the lamp, but something softer. The light of someone who once believed that if you just keep walking straight, you'll find your way home. I pressed my lips together, and something inside me settled, small, heavy, perfectly still. A text blinked across the dark screen of my phone just as I switched off the kitchen light. "Stop. You're destroying your family." No name. No number, just a string of digits glowing like a strip of ice. I stood still in the dark, listening to the thin, dry rain hitting the roof. Then I took a screenshot and forwarded it straight to Richard. Minutes later, the phone buzzed. "Leave it," he said. "I'll have someone trace the source." I set the phone down, pulled back the curtain. Outside, the street was empty, but it felt as if someone had just slipped past the fence and left footprints in the old snow. The next morning, Richard called while I was making coffee. His voice was steady but tight. The message was sent through a web gateway, not a regular cell provider. The IP originated from a commercial network block in Salem. He paused. "We had the tech team cross-reference it. It matches the office range of the medical supply company where Michael works." For a moment, the kitchen seemed to shrink around me. "It's circumstantial," Richard continued, "but admissible. If needed, the prosecutor can subpoena the exact device, login time, and user. For now, say nothing. Don't reply. Don't change your number. Let their words incriminate themselves." I sat down holding the mug, but not drinking. The smell of roasted beans mixed with damp wood, and for some reason it carried sadness with it. I opened my photo album and found an old picture of Michael, 12 years old, standing on Cannon Beach with a kite high in the wind, his knees covered in wet sand. I stared at that frozen smile and wondered what road had led that boy to the man who now sent threats disguised as concern. At 3 p.m, I heard an engine shut off outside. Through the peephole, Michael stood alone under the porch raincoat, dark with water hands in his pockets. The sky behind him was the color of metal. He said through the door, 5 minutes. "Please, just talk." I unlocked the top latch but didn't open it. "Meet me at the cafe on the corner," I said. 10 minutes. The cafe was nearly empty. The air smelled of ground beans and wet wool. I took a seat near the window, watching the parking lot shimmer under the drizzle. Michael arrived a minute later, soaked and restless. He didn't order anything. His hands rubbed together, not from cold, but from nerves. He started talking fast, about layoffs, bonuses cut, contracts lost, credit card calls, Ella's school deposit, mortgage reassessment, a life collapsing in real time. When he finally looked at me, he looked hollowed out. "Vanessa just did what I couldn't," he said. "I'm losing everything." I asked, flat as a nail driven into wood. "You planning to threaten your father through your job now?" He blinked once, then looked away. It wasn't me, he said. Someone at the office must have gone too far. I told a coworker about trying to make peace with you. Maybe they took it wrong. They traced it, I said quietly. The message came from your company network. I didn't mention subpoenas or server logs. I just let the sentence hang there until it found its own weight. Michael pressed his palms to the table. I never meant to hurt you, he said. We thought letting her parents stay was temporary. We thought it would help us breathe for a while. Vanessa loses her temper, but I love her. I don't know how to keep a house together when everything keeps falling apart. He said I'm sorry so many times it began to dissolve like sugar in rain. I asked another question, colder, quieter. Did you try to access my bank account? He froze, head down, the pause stretching until it felt like a road without signs. Then he said, I only wanted to check. I worried you'd be alone, that someone might take advantage. I thought if I understood your finances, I could protect you. He didn't mention Laura's cut and pasted signature. He didn't mention the fake midnight email. Some truths he kept buried like dust swept under an expensive rug. I sat up straighter, my back not touching the chair. You're losing everything, I said, because of greed. Not love, not duty. You wanted what wasn't yours, and you wanted it fast. You called it help to hide what it really was. You knocked on my bank account's door on Christmas Eve and called it concern. Truth doesn't need a polite costume. He looked up, half furious, half broken. What do you want from me? I told him. I'd filed the assault report and the elder financial exploitation complaint. From now on, all communication would go through Richard. Visitation wasn't a favor or a dinner invitation. It would depend on what the court allowed and on whether he and Vanessa learned the meaning of boundaries. I'm not fighting you, I said. I'm fighting what you did. A server set a coffee cup in front of me. I took a sip, bitter but warm. Outside, the rain had softened. A weak sunlight pushed through the clouds, a pale hand behind frosted glass. Michael leaned back, voice almost breaking. I don't know what to do anymore. I didn't give him comfort. Start by not standing on other people's backs to get where you want. Call the bank. Clean up your own debts. Tell your wife that from now on, every step leaves a trace. If she can't do that, then you will. He fell quiet. The grinder at the counter hummed like an old engine. People came and went, shaking off wet coats, carrying their own small dramas. Then he whispered to his empty cup. You're cutting me out of the will, aren't you? I didn't answer right away. I thought of the new documents Richard had drafted, no contest clauses, explicit safeguards, lines straight as painted lanes. The will has conditions, I said finally. Anyone who manipulates, disputes, or questions my capacity removes themselves from it. You can stay in if you learn where the line is. That choice sits on your back, not in my hands. His shoulders dropped, the weight of something unliftable landing squarely. He nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Can things ever go back? He asked. I looked past him to the street outside. The rain had stopped. The pavement gleamed like a mirror not yet dry. No, I said. All we can do is go forward. We stood at the same time. Michael said he'd bring the kids someday on a sunny afternoon, when the court allowed, when everyone was calm. When the paperwork's clear, I said, the door will be open. He picked up his coat, paused as if to speak again, then didn't. The glass door closed behind him with a soft chime. I sat there a while longer, staring at the half-empty cup. I didn't feel victory or vindication, just a quiet unlike any I'd known before. Not the quiet of losing, but the kind that comes after you've said everything that needed saying and left gravity to handle the rest. By evening, Richard texted. He'd archived the IP data and message logs. The prosecutor, he said, saw the anonymous texts as strong connective tissue in the case. He'd stop by in the morning to pull another camera backup just in case. The phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. It'll get worse if you keep going. I didn't screenshot this one. I just forwarded it to Richard, turned the sound off, and set the phone face down. Outside, the wind was just strong enough to stir the pine wreath on the door. I sat by the window listening to the faint creak of old wood beneath my weight. And I knew this time I wasn't stepping back. The courthouse opened under a Portland sky that was cold and dry, the Willamette River below reflecting a strip of dull silver light, thin as sheet metal. I passed through security, set my keys and wallet into a gray plastic tray, and listened to the buzz of the scanner filling the kind of silence only government buildings know. Richard walked behind me, carrying a thick file bag, his face calm like a straight road with no potholes. We took the elevator up. The hallway smelled faintly of paper and polish. The courtroom door was paneled in dark wood, the judge's nameplate high above it, gleaming like brass left out in the rain. Inside, the prosecutor stood by a rolling cart with a laptop and a screen paused on a frozen frame. My own image stared back, head turned, a white cloth pressed to my temple, a streak of red across my collar. A clerk moved down the aisle, handing out seat numbers. I sat in the third row. Richard settled beside me, unzipped his case, and the faint metallic clink of the zipper sounded almost ceremonial. The side door opened. Vanessa walked in with her attorney. Her hair was pinned back, her face bare of makeup, eyes swollen in the way of someone who hadn't slept. Michael followed, dark suit, no tie, looking like a man who had wandered into the wreckage of his own home. He didn't look at me. When I glanced toward him, he turned away as if afraid he might see in my eyes a mirror he couldn't face. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The prosecutor read the charge: assault with a physical object against an elderly victim, followed by a brief summary of the domestic background and the hospital report. Richard rose, steady and precise. He requested to present footage from my home security system, along with time-stamped verification and a data integrity statement. The judge nodded. A technician connected the cables and the screen flickered to life. The air seemed to drop 1 degree colder. The video rolled. Candlelight, the Christmas table, an ordinary scene that suddenly looked too sharp, too bright. Vanessa stood, glass in hand. The arc of red wine cut through the frame like a strike of paint. I watched myself flinch, half a second late, press the towel to my forehead. The sound of a child crying off-screen cracked the room open like a thread snapping in a storm. Richard asked to pause on 3 frames. Frame 1, the glass leaves her hand. Frame 2, the red streak hits my face. Frame 3. I turn, one hand holding the towel, the other opening the doorway. The judge studied that last image for a long time, the act of a man choosing distance over reaction. The ER doctor's written report followed a minor laceration above the left brow, closed with medical adhesive. No concussion, no hospitalization required. The attached photo showed the sterile light of the hospital so bright, it drained all the drama from the red stain. Vanessa's attorney stood speaking in that practiced tone used by those trying to rebuild reality from another angle. He spoke of age of grief, of the confusion that can follow loss. He mentioned my counseling sessions after Laura's death, suggesting that memory might bend to emotion under stress. Richard didn't interrupt. He simply opened a white envelope and laid a stapled packet on the podium, a cognitive assessment dated 3 weeks after the incident, signed by a geriatric specialist, sealed by the clinic. The results were near perfect across all categories. Normal reasoning, intact memory, no cognitive decline. Richard said evenly. Numbers speak. And so does video. And they're both speaking the same language. Vanessa lowered her head when the charge was read again. I heard her crying quiet, steady, like a faucet half open. Her lawyer leaned in, whispered something. She nodded, shoulders trembling. Michael sat one seat away, staring at the floor, his fingers locked so tight the knuckles went white. I waited for him to look up. He never did. The judge turned to me. Mr. Beckett, would you like to make a brief statement? Richard gave a small nod. I stood, steadying my voice against the weight of the room. I only wanted peace in the house I've paid off, I said. To keep Christmas as Laura loved it. I never wanted anyone standing where she once stood to face a courtroom. I just wanted the truth to stay where it belongs. I don't blame people, I blame choices. Because choices are what turned that dinner into a case file. Vanessa's lawyer spoke again, softer this time, about family pressure, about housing costs, about good people losing balance under stress. He framed it as a momentary lapse, not malice. He proposed counseling, anger management, reconciliation. Richard didn't engage with apology. He opened another folder instead. Printed emails, server logs, the Christmas Eve authorization request IP, traces the bank's flagged alert. This wasn't a slip, he said. It was a sequence. It began with moving new residents into his property, escalated to attempts at financial access, and ended with a thrown glass after refusal. We're not asking for punishment. We're asking the court to recognize the boundary crossed. Here wasn't emotional, it was legal. The courtroom was so still I could hear fabric shift against wood whenever someone adjusted their seat. The judge looked on at the medical report, then up at the paused frame on the screen, then directly at me. In that video, he said, "You are remarkably calm." That composure paired with this evaluation confirms mental clarity. The court sees a pattern of events, and its job is to wedge something solid in that pattern before it drags further down. Vanessa's lawyer asked for a brief recess. They whispered, two heads tilted close like people straining to catch a fragile sound. Then she nodded. The prosecutor noted her consent. The judge read the agreement aloud, suspended sentence, mandatory anger management. No contact with me, a restraining perimeter around my property, and referral of the financial logs to a separate division for investigation. Each term landed without drama, but with precision, like measured beats in a song that didn't need a chorus. When the hearing adjourned, I stayed seated a few seconds longer. Michael's chair was already empty. He moved quickly, walking behind the attorney and ahead of Vanessa like a man trying to pass through rain without getting wet. Vanessa paused at the doorway, pressing her fingers to her temple as if soothing a dull ache, then followed. Richard touched my elbow gently, a signal to go. The hallway outside was narrow, washed in pale winter light. We waited for the elevator in silence. Footsteps echoed from behind, quick, then halting. Michael stood at the far end of the corridor, one hand braced against the wall, the other gripping his sleeve. He looked down, then toward Richard, then at me only for an instant, but it felt like looking across a canyon. In that moment, I understood justice can redraw boundaries, but it can't restore the gaze of a sun overnight. The elevator doors closed. Downstairs, the revolving doors breathed in cold wind, carrying the scent of wet paper and new ink. Richard paused on the steps, eyes on the gray street. "We've done our part today," he said. "The rest will move on its own track." I nodded. My chest felt neither heavy nor light, balanced like a scale returned to zero. We stepped onto the stone walkway. Our shoes struck once sharply, and for a fleeting second over Portland, a thin blade of sunlight cut through the clouds so faint it made you wonder if you'd only imagined it. The next afternoon, the sky cleared in a way that felt almost deliberate, thin clouds dissolving in sunlight, like salt in warm water. I walked along the riverbank, the air smelling faintly of wet wood and cold mist, then turned onto the street that led home. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from Richard. The court signed the order terms as stated this morning. The financial file's been transferred to the separate review division. Keep your routine. If anyone approaches outside the court's conditions, call the police directly. By evening, Pastor Jim called. His voice, deep and steady, carried the tone of old wood inside a chapel. He said there would be a small community gathering after Sunday service. Nothing formal, just neighbors. You should come if you'd like, he said. I hesitated a moment, then agreed. When I hung up, I stayed on the porch a while listening to the sparrows chatter along the fence. My chest felt a fraction lighter, like setting down a weight I hadn't realized I'd been holding until it was gone. News of the hearing spread faster than I expected. The next day at the grocery store, Mrs. Helen stopped her cart beside mine near the dairy aisle. Her eyes were pink, as if she'd been crying. She said she'd been wrong to listen to what people said, that stories online were like spilled ink on a table whoever passes by can't help but get stained. She hoped I wasn't angry. I felt something warm near the ribs and told her the truth. I'm not angry. I'm just keeping my boundaries. Later that week, the prosecutor called Richard. Vanessa's agreement was finalized: 2 years probation, mandatory anger management, no contact, a set perimeter around my property. I didn't feel victorious, and I didn't feel relieved. It was like sliding a wedge into cracked wood, just enough to stop the split from spreading. Nothing more. The financial investigation was handed off to a separate division. Richard explained that since no money had actually been transferred, and the act fell within a family context, it would likely be logged as an attempted unauthorized access, cross-referenced with the bank's red flag alert. I didn't press for outcomes. I'd learned not every road has to be walked to the end, only far enough to know where to turn. Sunday came. I arrived at church 15 minutes early, taking a seat near the back. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, scattering patches of blue and red across the wooden floor. The faint smell of old candles clung to my sweater. When the prelude began, I looked around. A few familiar faces nodded. Some smiled, hesitant but kind. During his brief sermon, Pastor Jim told a story he called a lesson in seeing. He said, some wounds look small from afar until you touch them and realize how deep the needle went. And some apologies have to travel through time before they land where they're meant to. He didn't name anyone. He didn't quote parables. He just said that boundaries aren't built to divide, they're built to guide, so that whoever crosses one knows they're stepping out of another's safe ground. I listened, my throat tightening, then warming, like taking a sip of hot barley tea in winter. Days later, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office confirming the protective order in writing. It said that in case of violation, all I had to do was call 911 and read the case number. I took a photo of the letter, filed the image on my computer, printed a copy, and tucked it into a folder. The repetition of small acts made the house feel steady again. I unscrewed the old door viewer to clean it, tightened the loose hinge, changed the batteries in the doorbell. Little repairs remind a man that he still lives in a place he can control. At dusk, I walked to the post office. The air smelled of cut pine and damp soil. In my mailbox sat a small parcel with no return address. Inside was a postcard printed with a picture of the coast and a short handwritten note. May you find peace again. I didn't know who sent it. I placed it next to Laura's photo on the table and thought sometimes kindness doesn't need a name. It just stays a while like the scent of salt on your collar after a long day by the sea. That evening, I called Richard to confirm our next meeting. He reminded me there would be a brief compliance review next month, nothing serious. "Show up if summoned. I'll handle the rest," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "People are starting to look at you differently again. That's a good sign." I thanked him, hung up, and sat quietly as night came down slow. I cracked the window open an inch. Outside, water dripped from the eaves onto the flower bed, steady, rhythmic, like a guitar string tuned just right. I sat at the dining table, opened one of Laura's old books. The bookmark was still there, pressed halfway through. I didn't read. I just turned a few pages, touching the coarse paper with my fingertips. Outside, a car passed headlights sliding across the wall like a chalk line. The kitchen glowed warm behind me. No voices, no shouting, no wine spilled. Just the scent of garlic, the smell of wood, and one man learning how to take his first steps across old tile without looking down to see if the cracks were still there. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. The sky hung low and pale, stretched over the pines like a sheet of gray cotton. I brewed tea instead of coffee, set the cup beside Laura's photograph, and put on my coat. The community center opened early for art classes. The bulletin board still held the same crooked flyer I'd seen the week before. I signed my name, paid the fee, and was handed a basic watercolor kit and a single sheet of thick, textured paper. The woman at the desk said the instructor's name was Patricia Lang. She'd been teaching here for years, lived near the Eastern Hills. Patricia arrived wearing a deep blue scarf, her silver hair neatly tied her stride, quiet but sure. She set her brushes down and greeted each of us in turn, her voice carrying that soft rasp that comes from speaking often, but never loudly. She said today's lesson was light on water. Don't paint the river, she told us. Paint the light. Let the water decide where it wants to go. When I lifted the brush for the first time, I added too much water. The color bled fast, spreading into an oval that didn't resemble anything at all. Patricia stopped by, looked down, and nodded. Water likes to choose its own path, she said. Our job is just to give it a good start. During the break, I opened my wallet to find an old class card. A small photo slipped out Laura in her 20s, standing on a ferry dock, with the wind in her hair, smiling, just slightly off-center. Patricia picked it up for me, paused, and frowned with surprise. I know her, she said. Back in 1985, we took a night class together, charcoal drawing near Fremont. She worked during the day. We all did. I stood still as if someone had said a familiar name in a foreign room. Patricia went on. That class was loud. Everyone was tired. But Laura had these soft pencils she could make a shadow look like feathers. Once she showed me how to draw light by softening the dark, not by adding white. She said it made things calmer. I asked how she remembered something like that after all these years. Patricia smiled, eyes unfocused, as if looking through rain. Because on the last night we waited out a storm under the awning. She told me something I never forgot. Living is learning to place a patch of light beside a patch of dark until the two stop fighting. That afternoon, an email came from Richard. The financial investigation team had formally received the case. All updates would route through his office. You don't have to do a thing, he wrote. I thanked him, closed the laptop, and went back to painting. When the water dried, it left smoky edges along the paper. I wrote the date and time in the corner, not to remember, but to mark that I'd shown up. One evening after the second class, I found a letter in my mailbox from Michael, postmarked Seattle. I stood on the porch, holding it for a long while before opening it inside the kitchen. He wrote that his company had downsized, and he'd been let go. He'd moved to Seattle, staying with an old college friend, job hunting. He said he hoped I was well and that once things settled, he wanted to bring the kids to visit me in Portland, or maybe I could come north to meet them in a park. I called Richard, told him about the move, asked if it affected the court order. He said only the address needed updating with the officer of record. The restrictions stayed in place no matter the distance. If Michael wanted visitation, everything had to go through him through proper legal channels. I said I understood. After the call, I sat down and wrote a short reply. Just a paragraph wishing him well, reminding him to coordinate with his lawyer and not call directly. I left the letter overnight before mailing it, giving both of us time to live with the words. Weeks passed. Vanessa disappeared from social media. The profiles that once posted dinners and vacations and cryptic captions went silent. At church, no one mentioned her name anymore. At the grocery store, no more sidelong glances. Then one bright morning, our class met outdoors by the river. The water shimmered like glass sprinkled with sugar. I set my paper on the board brush in hand, watching how sunlight slid over ripples. Patricia stood behind me. When you see where the wind pushes the light, she said, let your hand follow it. Don't force it back. I pulled a streak of gray-blue across the page, dropped water along the edge, watched it bloom like breath. Patricia sat beside me, opening a small tin of old paints. I've had these since Laura, she said. Then she told me how Laura once painted a bridge with only 4 strokes, and somehow it was a bridge. I asked what Laura had said when she finished. Patricia paused. She joked that when she was gone, I should tell whoever was left that she'd painted enough. It'd be their turn. The words landed in my chest like a small stone sinking deep. I asked if she was sure Laura said that. Patricia nodded. It was half a joke, half truth, she said. You say grand things when you're young to hide what you're afraid of. I didn't realize until years later it wasn't a joke. I sat there feeling the wind thread through my hair, the river glinting like it was trying to say something back. Somewhere downstream, a motor started a low, steady hum. In my mind, a dark room began to fill with light. That night I opened the cabinet beneath the counter and took out a cracked glass jar, an old silver spoon, and a chipped porcelain cup. I cleaned them one by one and set them under the lamp. The crack in the glass glowed faintly. The spoon bent light in a warped oval. The cup leaned slightly like someone trying to stand upright after a fall. I took a photo and sent it to Patricia, asking if they'd work for the next still life assignment. Her reply came minutes later. They're perfect. The chips are what let the painting breathe. The night before class, I sat again at the dining table, poured a cup of tea, and reread Michael's letter. The line about the children running through leaves stayed with me. I folded the letter neatly and placed it beside Laura's photo. If living really was about setting light beside shadow until they stopped fighting, I thought then maybe this was what the light looked like right here in this quiet kitchen. I thought of Patricia's words, of Laura's echo through her. She wanted the one left behind to keep living. I dimmed the overhead lights, leaving only the lamp. Under its warm glow, the cracked glass and chipped cup looked beautiful in their imperfection, whole in a way that no flawless thing could ever be. I turned the latch on the window. Outside, the wind shifted direction, whispering along the eaves. The morning warmed in a strange, early way. Thin clouds drifted across the sky like faint brushstrokes. I brewed tea, cracked open the front door to let in a ribbon of air, and stepped outside to check the mail. Inside the box were a few flyers, an envelope from the insurance company, and one small yellow letter with no return address. 2 stamps showed white seagulls in flight. I tore it open on the porch. The paper was ruled notebook stock, folded 3 times, smelling faintly of wax crayons. The handwriting was large and slanted, a child's careful effort to make lines behave. Dear Grandpa, I miss you. I drew you. Miss Patricia and Grandma in the sky. I want to take an art class with you. Please don't be sad. I'll send more drawings soon. At the bottom were 3 red hearts, a crooked yellow star, and the name Ella, the exclamation mark, trembling off balance. Clipped to it was a small watercolor on letter-sized paper. I unfolded it slowly, the way you open something fragile. A soft blue sky washed across the page. 3 figures held hands, eyes made of dots, smiling mouths curved upward. The one in the middle had gray hair and glasses. On the left, a woman in a blue dress. On the right, a figure with a scarf and raised hand. Around them floated red hearts like untethered balloons. In the corner, a line of tiny letters read, "You look better when you smile." I braced a hand on the doorframe. My throat felt dry, my eyes burned the way they do when you walk out of cold air into warmth. I didn't fight it. The tears came easily, 2 warm streaks tracing down my face. Inside, I set the drawing on the kitchen table and sat down, touching the rough grain of the paper. For a while, the only sound was the clock ticking in the next room. My heartbeat slowed, syncing with that small, even rhythm like a wave touching shore. I propped Ella's drawing on the small wooden easel from my art class and placed it beside Laura's photo. From where I sat, it looked as if Laura stood next to the little girl in the scarf. Patricia's words from last week returned to me. Living is learning to place a patch of light beside a patch of dark until the 2 stop fighting. The sentence moved through me like a bird gliding low over the water, touching, then gone, leaving a brief warmth in its wake. I wiped my face and picked up the phone. Richard answered quickly, his voice as calm and steady as always. I told him I was ready to set up education trusts for Ella and Liam, funds protected from every adult, including their parents, including me. He paused a moment, then said he'd already prepared drafts. He explained 2 separate, irrevocable trusts managed by the Holmes Law Group. I'd be the initial donor, free to add yearly contributions. Each trust would pay only for tuition, books, supplies, summer programs, and housing, releasing funds only with receipts. The children would gain full access at 25, old enough to outgrow the impulsiveness of youth. I said that was exactly what I wanted. Richard asked if I wanted stronger protection. He proposed a firewall clause, no transfer, no loans against the trust, no proxy signatures, no parental interference under any title. At 18, the firm would send each child an annual letter teaching them how to read their statement and manage it with reason. He asked what I'd like to call them. I looked at Ella's picture, the red hearts floating around the smiling figures, and thought of Laura dusting sugar over pies while they were still hot. "The Riverside Light Fund," I said. "One for Ella, one for Liam." Richard repeated the name and smiled softly through the line. He scheduled the signing for that afternoon. By the time I reached his office, the sun had thinned into gold strips across the pavement. The room smelled faintly of varnished wood and printer ink. Papers were neatly stacked on the conference table. He guided me through every page like a man walking me down a familiar street, stopping only at unfamiliar signs. He showed me the clause for trustee succession, the one ensuring continuity if the firm ever merged. He pointed to the line granting me the right to appoint an independent reviewer for annual reports, in case something happened to me. I chose Pastor Jim, steady, quiet, unentangled in family matters. I signed each page carefully, the pen never shaking. Richard called the bank, patched in a third line. We set up 2 trust accounts, balanced portfolios, low risk, low cost. He told me not to check the numbers daily. "This isn't about gains or losses," he said. "It's about how well the kids sleep someday." When the first transfer cleared, I felt no rush, no loss, only the small click of something fitting where it belonged. Richard printed confirmations, clipped them neatly. "When they get older," he said, Our office will send birthday cards with small lessons about money, games, stories, nothing heavy. Kids still like real stamps. I told him Ella had sent me a drawing of 3 people standing in the sky, and she said I looked better when I smiled. He was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "That's a better directive than any legal memo." By the time I stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of the river back through the building's cool cleansing. I stopped at a stationery shop and bought a thin wooden frame. At home, I placed Ella's drawing inside it and hung it beside Laura's photo on the dining room wall. From my chair, I could see both at once. One woman remembered one child reaching forward. On that wall, the sky of a child had opened a new window. That night, I emailed Richard again, asking for a short side letter, clarifying my wish that the trusts not be used for anything extravagant or unrelated to learning. "I want them to see money as a bridge," I wrote, "not a carriage." He replied within the hour he'd add a non-binding ethical use clause, a reminder written in plain language. Every machine, he said, needs both the hardware and the heart. I brewed another small pot of tea and poured it into the chipped porcelain cup I saved for quiet nights. On the table, Ella's framed picture glowed under the lamp. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered thank you to whom I wasn't sure. In my mind, Laura was smiling her half-tilted grin, exactly as in the photo, her eyes glimmering like they'd been newly glazed. I told her silently that this wasn't revenge. This was restitution paid forward, not backward. Because adult justice can be dry, but kindness is what softens the soil so seeds can grow. I took a fresh sheet of pale blue paper and wrote a short letter to Ella and Liam. I told them Grandpa had started learning to paint, and his teacher liked the kind of sky with thin clouds. I told them their picture now hung beside Grandma's. I didn't mention courtrooms or consequences. I wrote that I was preparing a gift for their future, a bridge they could cross whenever they wanted to learn something new. I sealed the letter, placed a stamp, and slid it into the mailbox outside. The lid dropped with a clean metallic click, like a small lock turning perfectly into place. Night came gently. I dimmed the lights, cracked the window, and let the wind move through the room. On the wall, Ella's sky and Laura's portrait stood side by side, neither fighting for the light. Between them, the blank stretch of wall felt like a quiet country waiting for morning. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and listened to my own breathing, to the slow rhythm of the house itself. Outside, the city still hummed somewhere far away. Inside, everything had finally settled into the place it belonged. November 2025. Portland turned cold early that year. The wind swept across the porch, carrying the scent of pine and the soft clink of a metal wind chime. I spread a red cloth over the table and opened the old box of Christmas ornaments I'd kept for decades. Faded glass baubles, brittle pine sprigs, and the small wooden angel Laura had bought at a craft market back in 1998. Its string, thin as a thread of light, was still intact. I set the angel on the table, brushed off the dust, and fixed the tree into its stand. When I switched on the first string of lights, the room brightened, not dazzling, just enough to illuminate the memories that had survived the wreckage. A year had passed. Last Christmas had been the fracture. This one, all that remained was peace, the one thing no one could take. That week, Richard called to invite me to a community event his office was hosting, Elder Justice Awareness. He said I was one of the few who could speak about what happened without bitterness. I hesitated, then said yes. The event took place at the Riverside Community Center. Outside, fallen maple leaves blanketed the courtyard in gold. Inside, warm light and the hum of quiet conversation filled the hall. I sat in the 4th row, holding a printed program between my hands. Richard took the podium first, talking about aging autonomy and how easily financial boundaries blur when love and obligation intertwine. Then he said my name. I walked to the front facing a room of strangers whose eyes felt oddly familiar. No notes, just my voice. I told them that a year ago I sat in my kitchen with blood and wine on my shirt thinking I'd lost everything. That for nights after I'd wondered if saying no made me a bad father. And that now, standing here, I wasn't here to accuse anyone, only to prove that boundaries are what let a person remain themselves. I ended with a sentence Laura once lived by, more than she ever said: protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's how you love yourself, right? For a moment the room went still. Then applause, soft, steady, real. Richard smiled from the front row, his eyes calm and kind, the way they looked when he talked about justice as something alive, not procedural. Afterward, Patricia found me near the door. She handed me a purple wool scarf and said, "The coastal wind will cut tonight." I laughed, told her I was only driving down to walk the beach, not staying long. She smiled. The short trips are the ones we remember most. By dusk, we were standing on Cannon Beach. The sun was dissolving into the horizon, gold to amber to violet, fading into a single borderless hue. The waves rolled cold but steady. Patricia walked beside me, hands tucked in her coat hair, swept back by the wind. I told her I'd rehung Laura's photo in its old place next to Ella's painting, that I'd learned how to let empty space exist without trying to fill it. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Some losses aren't meant to heal. You just learn how to live next to them." I nodded. The wind pressed against my coat. Last Christmas, I lost my family. This year, I found myself again. Some doors have to close for peace to find its way home. And if anyone ever calls you selfish for protecting that peace, remember, self-respect doesn't need permission. I looked down. Our footprints stretched side by side until they disappeared into the tide. By morning, the water would erase them, but the moment would still have existed. I turned to Patricia and asked if she believed people could start over at 66. She smiled. Every beginning just needs someone willing to stand back up. That's enough. When I got home to Portland, the house was dark. I flipped the switch. Light poured across the walls and caught the tree in the corner. The old glass ornaments shimmered, trembling slightly in the draft. I stood there alone but steady, hearing the soft creak of the floorboards, the scent of pine mingling with tea. This Christmas there would be no children's laughter, but no breaking glass either. I placed the little wooden angel at the top of the tree and looked up for a long time. If anyone's listening to this story, thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening to a man once called selfish for wanting peace. And if you've ever been there yourself, believe me, protecting your peace is not a sin. It's the only way to keep the gentler part of you from being crushed under misplaced gratitude. I turned off the overhead light, leaving only the tree to glow. Through the window, pine branches brushed the glass. I whispered a late Christmas wish. Real peace isn't loud. It arrives quietly, like the first breath after a long, hard sleep. And if you believe that too, share this story with someone who still needs to hear it.